Hello and what is up YouTube? My name is G3Iron and today we are talking about archetypes, and we are only a few hours away from PoE 3.7 getting announced and all of the excitement that surrounds hype season in PoE. There's kind of two different ways to think about PoE timetables or calendar of events. And the way at least I think about PoE calendar events are simply whether or not there is actively a league going on, or we are actively hyping up a new league or building anticipation to a new league. Those are really the two hype cycles or the two life cycles of Path of Exile at the moment. Either we're in the midst of a new league and it feels fresh, or maybe it's a long league that's going really well that we're all still enjoying, or it is now hype season and we're building up whatever the next league is because we're all subject to the massive teases and massive hype train that is Grinding Gear Games, and they do an exceptional job of it. Their community team does an exceptional job of getting us all excited for the things that are coming down the pipeline with Path of Exile. So today I wanted to, before we actually get any announcements about 3.7 to come out, I wanted to give us all an opportunity to put our kind of predictions and ideas out on the table. I wanted to give us a discussion platform to do that. And so we've got 3 questions here today that we'll come back to at the end of the video. But what archetypes were being used for developing in 3.7? What do we think what archetypes will be used or were used for development in 3.7? What skills is GGG pushing for players in 3.7, do we think? And then what ascendancy will get left behind in PoE 3.7? Now, I've got a couple of points to get to here before we get to those discussion questions. So first off, what is an archetype? And this actually came out, this was, I believe, Betrayal. Yeah, this is the Betrayal Balance Manifesto. This was published on December 3 of 2018, where the team actually goes over some of their in-depth development process, and were really transparent with us as a community about how they develop, how they build and balance things on the back end at Grinding Gear Games. So I wanted to read this to you guys because I was thinking about it and wanted to make sure we were all on the same page as we have a discussion on what sort of archetypes they're using for 3.7. I think this gives us valuable insight into how things are built again, on the back end at Grinding Gear Games. So here's what they say. Archetypes, one of the approaches, notice right there, one of the approaches, it's not the only approach, but one of the approaches that we use in patches in developing skills and making changes around some specific playstyles. This is centered around the concept of having some build archetypes. We make a specific build and add features and balance changes around that build. While some players are expected to end up in the archetype, we also want the tools to be useful in existing builds and to allow and change other builds that share elements with it. Okay, so that's the purpose statement of archetypes. It's there so that way the development team has some structure and has some bones to actually go off of when building up a build or when trying out different skills. It actually puts some flesh and code on what would otherwise just be theories and ideas, right? So they've got to test their skills, their passive trees, their ascendancy changes on something, and so they use archetypes. So in 3.5, the 3 archetypes that were used were, first off, a cold-based dot spellcaster, which was all the rage during Betrayal. Occultist, Cold Vortex, Cold Snap people were all over the place, Frostbomb people all over the place during Betrayal, which was really, really popular in Betrayal and had maintained some of its popularity coming out of Betrayal, but really dropped off continuing on through Synthesis as other skills cropped up. But originally there was a dot-based cold spell caster. Okay, the second archetype was a Hierophant-based caster that was based on the new skill which came out with 3.5, which was brands. There was Storm Brand and then Armageddon Brand. Both of those skills have found their own niches, Armageddon Brand being the more boss killer friendly with a couple of different ways to build it. You can either build it on hit or build it for ignite with Armageddon Brand. That was something that I used when it first came out to take down Shaper. It was a wonderful skill, and people were saying it was trash in comparison to Stormbrand. And yes, it is in terms of clear, but in terms of bossing when it first came out, it was absolutely insane how strong that was. And then, of course, Lightning or Stormbrand is still a go-to skill for leveling and for racers, just for how fast it is and all the quality of life that it has. So the Hierophant-based Brander. And then the third archetype that they went with for 3.5 was the champion-based melee character based on new axe and sword steel skills with the new effect Impale, supported by the new skill type banners. Now, some people have figured out a way to make this work really, really well. I did not. I used it as a league starter actually in 3.5, and it was goodness to gracious darn awful. I was trying to scale up just pure physical damage. I was trying to get away from elemental damage. I thought it would be cheaper early on because everybody would be trying out all of this elemental stuff. Boy, did I turn out to be wrong. You can go back in time and look at some of those starter builds and starter videos and discussion videos from the beginning of Betrayal League, and I was just constantly behind that whole first weekend because I picked a very, very bad lackluster starter, and Impale was really, really bad. I switched over that champion character to play something totally different, and it worked out a lot better, but boy, that was just terrible. So, all this being said, they use archetypes in order to try to flesh out their builds and actually put some ideas behind things. These are not, what these are not, I will say this very clearly, what these are not are GGG sanctioned and enforced builds that players must play. GGG does not build 3 different builds and say these 3 builds are going to be the meta and you better play them because their numbers are just so superior to everything else. You have to play these. I think there are companies out there inside the gaming space and inside the gaming market right now that do things like this, that will attach a marketing campaign, that will attach microtransactions and aesthetic purchases alongside particular skills or particular character effects or particular characters inside their game packaging, and then sell that to you. And they say they're not a pay-to-win game, but when they balance a lot of their actual in-game stats around their microtransactions and their purchases that are alongside certain characters, certain abilities, certain weapons, certain itemization, it might not be pay to win overtly, but it's subversive. It's subverting pay to win. It's subversive pay to win. It really feels really kind of slimy. And GGG doesn't do that, thankfully. Praise God that they don't do that. That they take these templates as a basic outline of what these skills that they're testing to see how strong it is and how it feels. And they simply want to use these archetypes to be able to actually run those skills that they've been messing with, those ascendancies they've been messing with, and those items they've been messing with through the game engine and see what it feels like for players. And sometimes they turn out to be really, really strong, like the cold dot-based spellcaster that a lot of people played throughout Betrayal 3.5, and some of them are seeing longevity to the skills and to the archetype, like the hero font and the brands that are attached to that. Lots of people are playing brands regardless of whether you're hero font or not. And then you've got some stuff that's not necessarily a home run. Maybe it's a swing and a miss, like the Impale skills. Now, I'm not saying that because Impale is terrible and will always be terrible. I'm saying simply when they released Impale, it was not strong or competitive in any way, shape, or form to other skills on release. It was not nearly as easily achievable to clear content throughout the game using Impale skills as it was, let's say, the brand skills, or let's say cold-based dots. Just comparatively, out of those 3 archetypes, there were definitely some that were better in certain situations than in others. Now, that being said, those are archetypes for 3.5. Archetypes are not something that were just used in 3.5. This is an article. Of course, all of this will be linked down below in the video description for you if you'd like to read it yourself. This is a interview with Chris Wilson back in February talking about PoE synthesis with Chris Wilson. And I just wanted to get to a couple of quotes that Chris actually gives here. So he says, where is it? Here we go. He says that there are a number of chaos and holy spells that were added. We didn't get a development manifesto or a line like we did with Betrayal for synthesis that said, hey, here are the archetypes that we used. But there's very clearly some evidence of some archetypes used. One of them is that Soul Rend is intended to be a short one-stop shop for those wishing to try the Chaos Spellcaster archetype. As Chris Wilson noted, we'd hear of players seeing a Chaos build on YouTube or Twitch, but it takes a while to master. Usually you'd have to cast a spell here, a spell there, and another on a group, acting like a combo of sorts. Soul Rend would be a good introductory spell for the Chaos Spellcaster archetype before you move on to more complicated combos. So there was a Chaos Spellcaster archetype, and there is no doubt that shines through the entire patch of 3.6 with all of the different spells that got revamped. Chaos is definitely one of the spell types that came out with lots of different options, lots of different play styles, lots of new exciting gameplay replayability with it. Now there was also another archetype that came out of this. And of course, 3.6 was all about revamping spells. And so not only were those chaos spells that got an archetype that they were based off of, but also there were elemental archetypes for spellcasters. Apart from Soulrend, we were also treated to a short video seen below showcasing Divine Ire. It's a brand new holy attack for the Holy Spellcaster archetype. Holy spells combine physical damage with elemental spells like fire or lightning and a bit of wrathful smiting as well. So we've got a couple of different archetypes here, and here's the next quote relating to it. Diversity is in character builds is the lifeblood of Path of Exile. We have around 40 skills and spells in the game, but players are only using a handful of powerful ones. Charts would tell them which ones are better and which ones aren't. We're doing a game-wide rebalance of spells to make every spell viable and interesting. Now, this makes it really tough to do when you're using an archetype style balancing system in order to actually shake up the meta of a particular game. Because on the one hand, and this is just a natural outflowing of using an outline style, archetype style development, one of the strengths of that, obviously, is you've got something to go on. You actually have something to really test what it is that you're working on with. That's a strength of it. A weakness of it is that, on the one hand, you can drift into that side of things that we already mentioned about, where there's a pay-to-win side, where a game company might just say, hey, we're going to attach all of our marketing, all of our business model, all of our MTX, all of our microtransactions along to this particular type of balancing scenario. We're going to dictate all of our resources on the back end for development of this particular skill or this particular item or this particular character. We're going to dump all of those human resources into just these couple of archetypes, and that saves us money on the back end, because now we don't have to try to diversify our resources on the back end to actually balancing everything. We're just gonna say, hey, these are the three things we're updating right now. You guys as players deal with it. These are going to be the three things that are popular for the next couple of leagues or for the next couple of months. And PoE doesn't necessarily do that, right? So again, they don't fall into either of those pitfalls. Thank God that they don't. They really do a great job of developing these archetypes, but nonetheless, these archetypes do have strengths and do have some weaknesses. It's not necessarily the perfect way to develop, because there is no perfect way to develop. It's constantly iterating on and improving on different ideas and concepts that you are trying to flesh out. So diversity being the lifeblood of PoE is a particularly interesting quote from Chris Wilson. Not interesting in like, oh, it's a conspiratorial quote. Oh, this reveals the heart and soul of Chris Wilson as an evil game master who's he's the puppet master over PoE. No, that's not what this reveals. What's interesting and fascinating about this is that PoE, oftentimes people have critiqued or even simply observed that a lot of the times PoE doesn't necessarily seek to balance things. By balance things, making things necessarily equal to one another in terms of their availability and playability, but rather when PoE seeks to balance something, they do it on a cyclical nature, where they simply say, okay, you played X, Y, or Z for a while, and that's great. We're glad you had your fun. Now we're going to say X, Y, and Z goes away. We've got some new stuff that we've been playing around with and having fun developing, and so we're going to buff that, see if you guys like it, and if you like it, great. If you don't, no worries. We at least gave it a shot to shake up the meta, and we nerfed X, Y, and Z, so that way you guys were forced to try something different. And that's really, really cool, because it avoids that whole pay-to-win side of things, where you're just buffing a couple of specific things that are now clearly better. Instead, you're trying to nerf one or two things that were specifically better and forcing players, your player base, to actually go out and try different things, and forcing the player base to discover for themselves what they actually might enjoy or what might next be that most meta skill. We see that most recently over the last year with Arc, where Arc was the go-to. Enki's Arc guide was like the go-to guide. There were so many new players, so many of you that have joined the channel and joined the G3 community that got their start in PoE playing based off of Enki's Arc guide. Like, because Arc was it. Arc was the meta. And then Arc stayed and was maintained as a meta for a long time. And then GGG said, nope, we're going to smack Arc enough such that the quality of life of it and the damage of it is no longer worth it. Go find other stuff to play with. And we did it. As a community, we've done it. We've gone out. We've found other things to play with. And so there's advantages and disadvantages to this archetype style. But diversity is indeed the lifeblood of PoE, because when something sticks around for too long, so many players say that is just terrible and boring. a very recent discussion that we had was on Winter Orb. Winter Orb. So many people are playing Winter Orb right now, and yet so many people who are not playing PoE right now are saying Winter Orb is boring, I hate this meta, and I don't want to play it right now, and I can't wait for 3.7, and I'm not even going to participate in Flashback League because I want that diversity. I want something other than just a clearly defined best skill, i.e. Winter Orb, or i.e. for last year, Arc, right? So players want to have build diversity and feel like the choices that they make and the choices that they are presented with in the game are meaningful and actually have risks and rewards associated with it, rather than simply having a particularly well-defined skill that's just a tier above everything else. So this is a really interesting quote. It again tells us that GGG is self-aware, that they're very aware of their player base, they're very aware of developing their game. They do a great job of communicating that and letting us know, hey guys, we're aware diversity is one of the things that makes us a great game, and replayability is one of the things that makes us a great game, so we're going to aim for that. So they tried that with 3.6. We've seen a lot of different skills come out of that, most notably Winter Orb taking the lead during our present particular meta that we are in right now with Synthesis. So this brings us back to our questions, which this is a quick graph from our mid-league meta overview video from, when was this? This was April 26th, okay? So almost a month ago, all right, where we did our mid-league meta overview of Synthesis. And you can see on here, like, the ascendancies that are way on the bottom side of that particular tier list and the ascendancies that are way on the top side of that particular tier list. By the way, all the numbers on this are pulled from PoE Ninja for characters involved in Synthesis Hardcore and Synthesis Softcore. And so this brings me back up to that archetype question that we began our discussion with today about what ascendancies are popular, what skills are popular, and what archetypes do we think they actually used for PoE. So that brings us to our discussion questions for today. So what archetypes do you think they used for developing 3.7? If they did one with a Hierophant, and they did one with the Occultist, and they did one with the Champion in 3.5, we know that they didn't do those three in 3.6. They probably did something with some sort of elemental character. Probably the Inquisitor was one of them for 3.6, because the Inquisitor saw a bunch of changes to their passive nodes. Also maybe a Scion, because the Scion had a bunch of changes on their passive side of things. But then also, of course, maybe even another Occultist-based character, because Occultist had a bunch of changes, and then maybe even Trickster, because Trickster got buffed. And we're seeing the result of those buffs and those changes, where lots of players are trying out those particular ascendancies. So I wanted to ask you guys, what archetypes do you think were used in developing 3.7? What skills is GGG pushing for players to use in 3.7? A lot of you said, hey, Winter Orb is going to get nerfed. It's going to get nerfed. Nobody's going to be able to play it. It's going to get nerfed. Everything else is going to get buffed. The short answer for this, of course, is just to say melee. We know that 3.7 is the melee rework. So the short answer is just to say, oh, Iron, of course they're pushing for melee skills because, like, it's the melee patch balance. So, duh. Yeah, okay. Thank you, genius. Thank you for your comment. I'm going to give you a round of applause. Thank you for your comment. But what skills in particular? Don't just say melee. Give us something that you really think, really push yourself out there, if you're going to comment at least, on what skills do you think players are pushing for in 3.7? I think one in particular actually is going to be Cyclone. We already know that Cyclone is getting the channeling tag, but it would not surprise me at all if they came out with an archetype that was based off of a character that was using Cyclone as a cast while channeling setup. That would not surprise me at all. And then what ascendancy will actually get left behind? So we can all probably guess that melee-oriented ascendancies, maybe things like the Raider are going to get a rework, maybe something like the Slayer is going to get a rework. Basically, if you look at our Synthesis League meta overview, you look at the right-hand side of things, and you're like, hey, these are all the people that got left behind during Synthesis. The Assassin, the Raider, the Chieftain, the Slayer, the Berserker, the Pathfinder. Like, those are probably going to be some of the ascendancies that get buffs and gets changed. I think we're probably going to see this exact chart flip-flopped, like in a month and a half when we're doing our early league overview of 3.7. I think that's probably what it'll look like, but maybe I'm wrong. So what ascendancies do you think will get left behind? We all can guess, hey, they're going to buff the ascendancies that are on the bottom end. We all probably know, hey, Berserker and Slayer are probably going to get played by a lot of people in 3.7. And Juggernaut is just always there. It's always consistent. So things like Chieftain, Raider, Slayer, Berserker, like, hey, those are going to get buffed and flipped. But that's not the question. The question that I want to know from you is what ascendancies will get left behind? What ascendancies are people going to go, oh, yeah, that ascendancy exists? What ascendancies essentially are going to get the Slayer and Berserker treatment? from Synthesis League. What ascendancies are going to get left behind in 3.7? Thanks so much for joining us for this particular discussion. I thank you in advance for all of your comments and questions and conversation that we get to have down below in the comment section. For those of you who are veterans of the channel, you of course know the drill. I hope that you get a Mirror of Calandra. It drops for you in 3.7. Those of you who are new to the channel, you can hit like, subscribe, and ding the bell to be notified about more discussions just like this one.
Nice patrons, yes, good patrons. They're so kind and supportive.
I can't believe you watched that thing. That was good job. You did it. You got through the whole video. Yay.